Hey everyone, today I have with me Scott Anthony Barlow. He is the founder and CEO of Happen to Your Career. He's been featured on CNBC, Yahoo, CareerBuilder, Fast Company, and Huffington Post, and various colleges and universities as a top expert on career happiness. He gets way excited about careers, coffee, hey, me too, and helping people take control over their life and work. He lives with his wife and 3 kids in Moses Lake, Washington, and sometimes Paris or London, okay. And when he's not traveling, he and his team run 2 of the top 5 career change podcasts on iTunes, including Happen to Your Career podcast. Thanks so much for being on the show, Scott. I'm so excited to have you here. And man, would I love to be in one of the top 5 one day. So, I'm looking up to you.
I think you can make it happen. And I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And so for those who are listening and not catching the video right now, what you can't see is that behind Scott, he has actually the words "make it happen." So perfect. We all need to hear that every now and then. I do too. So thanks so much. Well, so Scott, did you always have it figured out? How did you know what your career path would be during college and after? What did that look like for you?
Oh my goodness. For me, I was one of those college students that changed majors again and again and again. So I was very much the student that was like, well, you know what? I went into college trying to figure out, okay, well, what could I do? Well, I started a band in high school and I love music. So I could do that, but I don't necessarily want to travel around and do all the tour stuff. So maybe I could start a recording studio. So that's where it started. And then I changed majors to, I think at some point I hit programming and coding and decided I didn't want to write code in a closet. And then eventually found business and started moving into the business program. And that was something that I found I could really sink my teeth into more and more and more, and ended up leaving college with a HR degree and management. I'd actually triple and quadruple majored at one point, but decided I needed to get out of college within the same century. So I left and I moved on, and I went and accepted a job offer that I had actually before I left college, and then, which was great, which was phenomenal. I know not everybody's in that position, and I absolutely had my friends and family all telling me that, hey, you're so lucky. This is awesome. You take the job. It pays really well. And it actually really looked like a pretty good deal as far as things go, because I was leading a team of 20 people straight out of college, and it did pay really well. And quite frankly, I didn't know what else I was going to do. So I took the job. I moved my brand new wife at the time, Alyssa, down to Portland, Oregon, and we started life together, and I started going to work, commuting 2.5 hours plus a day, realizing that not only did I not like the traffic, that the job was just an absolute terrible fit, just horrific fit as well. I was learning a lot, but I was really, 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 really bad at it. And I was gaining weight. I gained almost 50 pounds. And so that was my introduction right out into college. And I, decided that crap, I'd better do something about this. So that was about 1 year into all of that.
I think so many listeners can relate to this. I know I could relate to this. My first job out of college, I'm like, this is what it was meant to be. This is what I've been working so hard for. This is not where I saw myself. I was in government consulting. I had never been so bored out of my mind. And it was supposed to be this really challenging, cross-functional team, problem-solving experience. And there just wasn't even enough work for the entire team. So, most of the times I was just bored. And my family was like, you're on the right track. You're doing everything right. So I know what that's like to have these cheerleaders. But if you don't feel it for yourself, what's the point?
Exactly. I really did have that exact same experience that you describe. And to the point where I remember driving into work and stopped in traffic because it's Portland and, traffic only moves so fast. And I remember looking around at all of the other cars and looking at the people's faces and thinking, hey, is this what it's like for everybody? How do people do this? This is And that was right around the same point in time too, where I decided, look, I've got to do something about this. I don't care what all these other people are doing, but I cannot do this. I'm going to go absolutely insane. So I I went and I had a conversation with my boss. I called him up. He was in a different state and said, okay, I got to talk to you about, something that's kind of important. And I got him on the phone and I told him, hey, you know what? I think maybe that this is the wrong fit. And maybe even I made a mistake in taking the role. I thought it was going to be different. And, I told him all these things and it felt great to have it kind of off my chest, if you will. And he asked some really good questions to try and understand. And he said that he agreed with me on a lot of different points. And apparently he did feel the exact same way because 3 weeks later he fired me.
Oh, so it felt good, but then not so good 3 weeks later.
Not so good. Yeah. But you know what? In hindsight, I'm really, really glad that happened because that set up everything else. First of all, as I was driving home in the rain because it's Portland and it rains a fair amount there. And I had to, first of all, pick up the phone and call my brand new bride and say, hey, I know I moved you to Portland, Oregon and away from your family for this job, but I actually don't even have a job anymore. So, we'll figure it out. But all of those type of horrible experiences and kind of that immediate emotional backlash and the shame and everything else that goes along with getting fired. I am really glad it happened because it caused me in that same car trip home to say, look, I cannot ever do this again. There's no way I'm going back to this type of thing. I don't enjoy work and it doesn't fit values wise. It is a bad fit in every aspect of my life. And so that kind of decision and declaration and commitment led me to also saying, look, I've got to figure this out for my own. And that's what I spent about the next 5 to 7 years doing. And I started getting what I considered to be my dream jobs again and again and again. And as that was happening, and I was, moving from one role to an even better fit role. And I kept realizing, look, this gets better and better and better as you start to figure this stuff out. Then I kept finding myself in the same type of conversation. I was having coworkers or friends that were like, hey, wait a minute. How did you make a transition from operations to HR? Or how did you get a $40,000 increase when they're not giving out raises? Or, all those types of things. Or how figure out what you actually want to be doing. And so I found myself going to Starbucks, and I'm a coffee fan, as it turns out. So people were buying me coffee and they were saying, hey, tell me how to do this. And that ended up leading to the company that we have now, Happen to Your Career, many years later.
Yeah. So you kind of fell into coaching people after you went through the journey yourself. So I want to take you back because only now can you be like, I see this moment as a gift, right? But I want to take you back to that moment when you got the call 3 weeks after you thought, I got this off my chest. My boss understands, like, this isn't the right fit for me, but maybe I'll figure it out. Who knows? You get this call that you're fired. What are the thoughts that are going through your mind? What did that feel like in that moment?
So first of all, it was not a call. Well, my boss told me, hey, get all of your local direct reports together. We're going to do a training. And he showed up and put some documents in front of me and said, surprise. He didn't actually say surprise, but it's not a training, as it turns out. Guess what? You have two choices. You can either go ahead, and here's what's behind door number one. You can go ahead and you can accept no severance, or we'll just pay you out for the remainder of the 2 weeks. And then you can walk out of here right now, or behind door number two, you can go ahead and get up in front of all of your people and tell them that, hey, we've worked something out to where you're moving on, and do a handoff, and then we'll pay you severance. So I
wow, I feel like that's like stuff that could only happen before the internet age, because I feel like you would have then made a YouTube video being like, I quit, with like confetti coming out, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, that's some real messed up.
It was not the greatest. And again, in hindsight, many years later, I'm glad that it happened. It probably took a couple of years before I could even say, no, I actually got fired. I think I called it like laid off, or I don't even know what I called it, but like
we all do it. We should all do it. Right. Because being fired, the words just sound like, oh my God, what I ruined everything or something, like it's all on me.
Yeah. And it was a bad fit. And in hindsight, it really was one of the best gifts that I could still be there. One of my good friends is still there. To this day,
Mm-hmm.
trust me, it was a much better fit for him, actually. It was some of the things that didn't fit values wise, he's actually changed the corporation, which is cool to see. But I could
Nice.
still be there if that hadn't happened. So to answer your question directly, how did that feel in that moment? It was horrific. I decided, look, I'm going to take one for my brand new wife and my family and everything like that. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get up in front of the room all red-faced and trying not to cry too much. And then I'm going to do this. And then I went ahead and drove home very shamefully. And it was an hour and a half drive home at the time. And I think I spent the first hour just thinking, how can I tell Alyssa this? How can I tell my wife? Like, it still like actually kind of makes me like, as I say that out loud, it's still like I get these chills coming back to me. So it's very, very present, very real, and has been very impactful in everything else that came back because it was so emotional.
Yeah. Well, so how did you get out of that state, that emotional state, and move towards something where you were saying things to yourself like, what do I really want to be doing? What do I really care about? Where are my values?
So I'm laughing because, to be completely honest, I kind of moped around for about 3 days.
Okay. Hey, that's fair. We can all mope around for a bit.
Yeah, it was a good solid 3 days of, I don't know, thinking life is over. And at that point, I realized, oh crap, we only have about 10 weeks worth of savings, and we had just bought our dream house and just bought our dream car and all kinds of other pretty stupid amounts of debt that we'd taken on to do all these things that we thought we needed to do at the time, and had very, very little in savings in total. Just 10.
I love the thought that we needed to do, like society's telling you that these are the things you do, these are the things you need to buy, this is what your life has to look like.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, it was a cool car. It was absolutely my dream car, Infiniti. At the time, is G35. They don't even make that anymore, but think like luxury race car almost. And it was cool. But now, as I've gone through much of that, much later, and even you asked me, how did that happen at the time? How did I get all the way to the point where I realized, like, I actually don't care what I drive anymore, and that's just not very high in the list of priorities. And part of the way that happened way back then was that 10 weeks worth of savings was dwindling rather quickly, and we had all of those debts mounted on top of each other, and realized, oh crap, I need to do something about this. So I also knew that just 3 days before that, I had declared to myself and promised myself that I'm not going to do this again. So I had these two conflicting ideas in my head. And so I actually took what I had learned previously, even through that job, in terms of sales and marketing and some of the small pieces in the role that I really actually did enjoy and happened to be pretty good at. I took those and started applying them to the job search process. And then at the same time, I had the other piece tugging on my head saying, look, I know that some of the elements that I really, really want are to interact with people in a completely different way and to be appreciated in a completely different way and do things that don't feel like I am going against the grain perpetually. So it really started out with me trying to be aware of what those tiny pieces were that I enjoyed immensely. And then with that small amount of knowledge at the time, say, where could I actually get that? And where could that be valuable too? And since then, many years later, we've created a much more systematic process that's very based on not just what we've done working with people, but also the science and the research that goes along with, and psychology that goes along with, how people can make changes and how people can balance that happiness, as well as their other needs and some of their present realities. But at the time, I was just like, well, I know that there's these couple pieces, so I guess I better look at organizations that need that. And so I interviewed places like Nike and Target, and I didn't have any HR experience at the time, but I used my marketing and sales skills and connecting skills to be able to get conversations with people in these organizations and just get their advice on, hey, how can I move into this role? And I actually ended up getting multiple job offers inside that 10 weeks. And ended up accepting one that was in HR that, the guy who I interviewed with told me point blank, he's like, we don't hire HR people that don't have experience. So then I, of course, was like, well, what am I doing here then? He's like, I don't know. What are you doing here? So then that's where all the sales and everything kicked in. And the rest is history, and created the foundation for everything that we do today, because I had to figure it out for myself.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you were probably speaking your passion and the values of helping other people, which is what you're doing today. But in that moment, you knew it was within you that that's what you wanted to do, which is very HR, helping people, have the best experience possible in their workplace, which is what you weren't having before. So you wanted to make that shift for others in your new career path. Well, so yeah, I think what's interesting about what you said was that struggle that you were feeling of, I know I need to make money, and you felt the pressure of, I need to make money, and I know that I want to do something that I'm going to enjoy, and that you felt that it had to be one or the other. I think that so many of us think that it has to be one or the other, and that it can end up being this vicious cycle of doing what we're already doing that we know that makes money, instead of finding the ways that we can connect what we love doing to opportunities that make money. Because there are ways to do it. There's a position out there for every passion. It exists. And so if you can, no matter what experience that you have, if you can speak that passion for that, you can find a place where you can add value. And when you add value, there's a monetary, reciprocation for that.
Yeah.
So you're going to get paid to do that work.
Yes. So to be clear, I fully agree with everything that you said. And also the piece that has a tendency to get glossed over that I want to try to make implicitly clear, because in blogs, in media, in internet, a lot of times people don't share what it actually looks like to be able to make that happen.
Yes.
Instead, we say that, hey, go find your passion. And we say things like, I don't know, insert your cliched statement here. And what we find, and I get really geeky and nerdy about all of these types of things. What we find when we actually dig into the research, and as we've been helping people do this exact sort of thing, basically get exceptions made for them for all intents and purposes, get paid well, and be able to do what they love, because we've got really good data out there that says that really only 13% of people, at least in the US, are doing what they love. That's way too small of a number. And then you start to subdivide that and realize that only a tiny percentage of those people are actually getting paid really, really incredibly well. So then it starts to look really, really dismal. And I think you can begin to look at some of that data two different ways. You can say, oh, crap. Oh, bother. Like, it's never going to happen for me because it's such a small chance. I don't know, go all Eeyore on it. Or you can do what we've done and say, hey, wait a minute. I want to know what those small percentage of people are doing differently than everybody else out there. And what we realized, and what we've continued to see research on and develop some of our own research along the way, is that part of what these people are doing differently is they're not taking much of the advice that is recycled out there again and again and again on the internet. They are going about this in very unconventional methods, because what you just said earlier, I think is really very true and very powerful once you begin to internalize that, hey, there is something out there for you. Once you understand your strengths, once you understand your highest priorities in terms of what's important to you and what you need and what matters to you as it relates to your career and work and life, because you can't really separate out the two, no matter how much we think that we can. One impacts another.
Oh, totally. I mean, and if you're working a 40-hour week, think about it, that's a lot of time that you're spending in this place doing this type of work, surrounded by your coworkers. You want to feel uplifted by this. You want to feel that a good amount of that time is spent doing something that's meaningful to you, that there's a ripple effect to that work.
Yes, absolutely. So once we have that realization, and we also know that only a small percentage of people are doing it, we start to realize that these people are basically getting exceptions made for them.
Okay,
And
so how do you become the exception? That's the question, right?
yes, how do you become the exception? I love that you're asking that question in that way. Most people are like, wait a minute, what? And you're like going right to, okay, let's figure out how we become that exception. I personally, in our company, we feel very strongly that we want to make much more of that exception the norm.
Yeah.
And that just is the way that we do work and business and life and on and on and on. Okay, so let's see if we can start to break down some of the pieces that create that exception for you. So first of all, here's a really simple truth and really simple reality that I came to way back when. Is like, oh crap, if I don't know what I want, I can't get to what I want. And so that means, by definition, of course, we have to be really, really clear about what matters most to us. And what we find once we start breaking this stuff apart into what actually creates a work that's fulfilling, work that is exciting. There's no perfect work, there's no perfect companies or anything like that, but work where you feel like you're growing and you're getting what you need out of it. As a human being, but also taking into account your strengths and preferences, then there's a couple pieces that matter more so than anything else. Number one is you have to understand at a very deep level what you are good at. We call those pieces your signature strengths. And specifically, just for giving a really simple version for how signature strengths work, just think about not just those areas that you're great at, because there are people who are like, hey, I'm a badass at pivot tables and I don't want to do pivot tables for the rest of my life on Excel. Like, that doesn't sound exciting to me. But also think about those areas that you're great at that overlap with those areas that you enjoy, and also those that contribute value, and you can contribute value. Now,
so think the Venn diagram, right? Where they all come together in the middle.
Yep. But here's the piece that people miss. When I say strengths, a lot of people think of that Excel, or they think of those skills.
Those tangibles.
Yeah. And this is very much an iceberg type approach. So if you think about the pivot tables, and like, I'm way better than the average person when it comes to pivot tables, and I haven't had that much experience. It's not actually the Excel or being good at Excel or the pivot tables. It's actually what's underneath the surface at a deeper level that is your strength. And your signature strengths are those that often you can't help but doing. In a lot of cases, one of the ways that you can tell that it's your signature strengths are not only can you not stop doing it, but there's probably negative things coming from it as well. And we call those the shadow side of your strengths, or anti-strengths. So that's one clue. But I
think that's super interesting. Well, so let's color that. Like, are you saying like if you think that your signature strength is right making pivot tables, or you're like, I love Excel, right? So that's the tip of the iceberg. What's underlying there is it that curiosity that you have to solve the problem using these tools? Is it, is that what you're talking about more so, like some of these soft, intangible skills that you have that are so transferable that we just don't realize are transferable?
Let me give you a real world example.
Okay.
So a few years ago, we were working with a guy named Rushi. He was, I think he was like 23 or 25, can't remember at the time. And we worked for a consulting firm that you've absolutely heard of. And he had progressed up the ranks like really, really quickly coming out of school. So he was, high performer by all definitions. But as he was growing up, as you really get to know Rushi, one of the things that his family and friends would say about him is, he's OCD. Like he has to have everything organized just so. And he shared some examples. Like one point in time when I was talking with him, I had a conversation with him, and he was in a hotel room. He was traveling for work, and he's like, yeah, I couldn't even start working in here until I fixed the picture frame and I adjusted the lamp. Only then could I start working and focus on those other things. Now, a lot of people, including his friends and family, would say, oh, that's just Rushi, and they'd make a joke out of it. And Rushi had come into working with us in our company thinking these are actually a really negative set of behaviors and really negative set of habits. And that's how he was looking at it. But as we started to go deeper and deeper, you start to find out that this is actually directly related to Rushi's strengths. Rushi can't help but to see how things can be organized and put together in completely different ways that maybe you or I can't even imagine or fathom. And we just look at it as like, oh, Rushi's OCD. But instead, part of the reason he had progressed up the ranks in his firm was because everybody wanted to be on Rushi's team. So every time he was leading a project, he had everything so organized that the project went so well that everybody knew that it was going to go incredibly well, because he would take all of these steps at the beginning to make sure that it was uber organized. He couldn't help but do it. He'd go crazy if he didn't do that. He couldn't stop, even if you paid him to stop.
He sees that bigger picture. He sets the environment. Everything is just so. So flipping that, what he thought was something that was a negative, a weakness per se, into how can you see that as a strength? How can you see that as an area where you shine? Oh, I think that's so valuable. Okay, well, so what's number 2? How do we become these 13%, right? That's what we want to know. How do we take the 13% to 50%?
The other thing that you must know that begins to create that, what we call the destination or where you're going, is what matters most to you. So there's a couple ways that you can look at this. Part of it is, values. But when we say values, like that's so cloudy and murky, and people are like, oh, values. Okay. What does that mean?
I break it down into like the principles that you live by. Like, what are your like core principles? And we often say them in our daily lives, and we don't even realize like the things that you stick to, your beliefs, your core beliefs, and then also causes that you care about, because I think they kind of all come into values. But sorry, back to what you're saying.
And they can be. And what we find is that it's actually different for different people, sometimes drastically. Like, we were working with, actually, I just got off right before our conversation, an interview with Laura Morrison. And Laura was somebody who we helped out a year and a half ago. And we brought her back on the Happen to Your Career podcast because we were doing a Where Are They Now series.
Oh, nice.
Which was a ton of fun. It was so cool to reconnect with her and everything like that. But
look at that. And you can see your ripple effect from your podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So much fun. And I get a lot of purpose and passion out of that. But what I heard from Laura is that for her, the type of organization and the cause was something that she deeply believed in, and that mattered a whole bunch to her. However, we were working with somebody just last week where he was, as we were trying to figure out, okay, what matters more so than anything else to you, and starting to understand not just values and those principle-based type things, those are important, but also what do you value the most, which is another way to look at it. And some of the things that he valued the most in his work were actually the type of work itself, which means for him, so for Laura, it mattered a whole bunch the type of organization. For him, it matters a whole bunch more the exact type of occupation. So those are two polar opposite examples in some ways. And every person is a little bit different when you start to break down what is the recipe that creates meaningful and fulfilling and passionate type work, right? So
I love that way of thinking of it too, because we're not really thinking, we're thinking it has to merge perfectly with the kind of work and the organization, but sometimes one might matter to you more than the other.
Yeah. So if you want to, here's just a couple of questions that we ask that can help you get started in identifying these two big main pieces that help begin to create that destination.
All right, everyone start leaning in. Get your pens ready.
All right. Pens ready. Okay, so some of the questions that they ask. First of all, I'll just tell you that it's really difficult to say, what do I value most? Like to sit down and just start penning that out, that's way too big, way too complex of a question. So beginning to break it down in different areas. And that's one of the things we do for our clients all the time. Instead of saying, hey, as it relates to my environment, what do I value most? And when I say environment, that can even be further broken down in a variety of different ways. It can be physical environment, like I am working right next to a window because if I don't have light, I get really grumpy. And I find that I am happier, much higher percentage of the day, if I get to work outdoors or near outdoors where there is ongoing exposure to light. That's just me. That matters more to some humans than others, as it turns out. But the environment also means like, hey, where physically do you want to live? Do you want to live near water? Do you want to live in the city? We were working with somebody just the other day and she loves New York City, just loves New York City, would never consider moving away, but she had job offers for these other areas. And she's like, I don't know, do I take them? They pay so well. And it's like, no, you like this matters a whole bunch to you. And then it can still be other things like, what is the culture of the organization and what matters to you there? And for some people, these different pieces in different categories might matter less to one person and more to another person. So it's beginning to go through the process of prioritization in each of these areas. A couple other areas might be like finances and financial goals, could be relationships, and not just relationships like your friends and family. I mean, those matter, but also who is the type of person or people that you want to spend more of your time around. Because if we know what those are and what that is, that's a clue as to where we can begin to identify where we can find them, more of that destination piece, right? So think about what we're doing here. We're going through and creating what we call an ideal career profile, just breaking apart these strengths on one side, and then what matters most to us, what we value the most, and it requires prioritization, like we talked about. And then we're using that to begin to create this image or this picture or this vision of what we need and what we want. And one of the ways that, here's one of the questions, besides breaking it down into categories, with each one of those categories, you can ask yourself, hey, what is the absolute minimum that I need? And then what do I really want? So we call those minimums and ideals. And that helps people think about it in terms of, hey, what do I absolutely need? I need ongoing exposure to light. If I'm in it, like that's the reason why I couldn't code in a closet and like buried someplace. I would go just absolutely insane. I don't know. It would be bad. But I need that. I must have that. So if that is a minimum for you, then that's where you can write it down and move it up the list in terms of priorities. But what I really want maybe is I want to be working in a place where I can go indoor and outdoor office. And maybe that's one of my ideals. And I have that now, but that was something that I wanted for a long time and didn't have. But if I can't imagine it first, if I can't pinpoint, here's what I want, here's what I need, here's what I must have, it's going to be really, really, really difficult to chart a path to make that happen.
Yeah, if you just keep it floating up in the space of like, I think I want these things, but if you're not pinpointing it, like you said, and I'm a big fan of writing it down, that's until you can do that, right? And until you can say this is your minimum or this is your ideal with such definitiveness, only then can you start making those intentional moves towards that. I love what you talk about with the environment. I used to have this dream concept in my mind of like a dream office being like this like glass box office. Like, wouldn't that just be so cool if you kind of just didn't realize you were indoors while you were indoors? So you still like enjoy the AC, but yet be in like the wilderness. And what's funny is I gravitate towards those places. Like my place right now, like has, 5-6 windows around me. And I love that. And like the coffee shop that I love to work at is kind of like that glass box. And I choose it because of the light that comes in. So it's so funny. I don't think I ever really pinpointed it as my minimum or my ideal, but I do have this vision of this glass box office. I'm like, why don't they create offices like that? Wouldn't that be so cool? So it sounds like you clearly, what was that?
That can be your next step. A couple of years from now, you can invent the glass box office or have it custom made for you. That'd be awesome. Let me know when you do that, by the way. That'd be super cool.
Yeah, we'll co-work. It'll be the new co-working space. Let's do it. Well, so it seems that you're very passionate about career development. So what does it feel like to work in your passion? As the founder and CEO of Happen to Your Career, what does that feel like for you to wake up and work in your passion career?
It is something that doesn't get talked about. Is the reality is it's way harder to work in something that I'm incredibly excited and incredibly passionate about than it is to just go into a job. And I've done both to varying different degrees and gotten to see one polar opposite side of the spectrum versus another and a lot of things in between. And the thing people don't tell you about is it's way more difficult to work day in and day out and add a tremendous amount of value. That said, I wouldn't change it for the world because even though it's more difficult, I feel alive every single day. It is a completely different experience than if we go way back to the start of my career where I was going into the office and trying to figure out, hey, how am I going to get my goals done, but also not do anything because I am just having a terrible time with it and I hate it. Like, how do I get out of this? It's going crazy. So it's two polar opposite feelings. And those merge together. And I really, really enjoy that. But it's also something that doesn't get talked about, that actually it's a way harder way to live. But honestly, my perspective is that everything is hard to some degree. And there are different types of problems and challenges no matter where you're at. I would much, much rather be working through all of those and living my life in a way that makes me feel much more alive and gets me excited. And at the same time, even though it's not always easy, I always come back to what really resonates with me for purpose. And when I get to act on that, because that's something that's very important to me, then I feel like I am in more control, and I get to structure my life in the way that I want to. And I feel happy more often.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so it sounds like you come back to your why. So what's your why?
For me, it's really embedded in the name of our company. If you look up the root word or the etymology of career, then you start to find all kinds of things like carriages or paths. And you realize that one of the meanings for the same same root word as what's in carriage is it's really about the journey or the path. And our name literally means taking control of your journey or taking control of your path. And that's something I get really, really excited about, enabling people to live their life in a way that they want to, that they get excited about, as well as having influence in areas that they just didn't realize that they could have a tremendous amount of influence in, like their work and how much they get paid, and where they get to spend their time and all the things that go along with it.
Yeah, all too often I think we confuse the words career and job. We use them interchangeably, but they're really not. The career is a journey. I love that. That's beautiful. Okay, so what's the greatest challenge you feel that young professionals are struggling with when it comes to career? And besides, I would say, in addition to not seeing career as a journey.
There is that. There is absolutely that. And we could spend an entire 8 hours just talking about the challenges. However, one of the biggest ones I see is that there's more opportunity now to do meaningful work and purposeful work and fulfilling work than there ever was before. And there's more pressure now to do meaningful work and purposeful work than there ever was before, because those opportunities are there. And there's a lot more pain that goes along with it than if you would have asked somebody 50 years ago than now, today. So
right, the goal may have been just before was just to how to financially support yourself with your career versus doing something meaningful.
Yeah, so the expectations are different. So one of the single biggest areas I see is identifying that meaningful work because of the availability, because of the expectations that we have for ourselves now, and all the things that go along with it. So I know that we just barely got to start to scratch the surface. So I want to be able to give you something that will help as you're listening to this, because we talked about signature strengths, and we talked about identifying what is most valuable to you, what is most important to you, but not necessarily how to make a decision with that or anything else. So one of the ways that if you're finding yourself in that space, and I'm guessing if you're listening to a podcast called Find Your Passion Career, then you probably are right in that space right now. One of the resources that we've created is a 8-day mini course where you get an email every single day that gives you one of the exercises to begin working through this exact problem and challenge.
I signed up. I got the emails.
Cool. Very cool. That's amazing. That's awesome. So you can actually find that really easily by going to figureitout.co. Figure it out.
And I'll add it in the show notes too. So
perfect.co.
Yeah. And guys, I want you to have as many resources as possible to make it happen, to get over these challenges, right? So, take a note from what Scott is saying here. I would say, I want to leave everyone with, asking yourself those pointed questions. Really get really specific. What kind of environment do you want to have? where do you physically want to live? Where do you physically imagine seeing yourself on a day-to-day basis? Could you paint that picture? Could you write it down? Could you describe it? And the culture of the organization, how do you imagine that looking? Do you imagine yourself going to happy hour with your coworkers? Do you imagine yourself, celebrating birthdays together or at the office? What does that look like for you? Or are you more of an independent worker? And really paint that picture. But before we go, I don't want to forget, Scott, what was the passion object you brought and how does it reflect your passion?
My studio is actually surrounded by passion objects. Everything that's in here literally is something that I care about in some way.
That's your ideal environment. That's how it should be.
My ideal environment. So that's part of, I suppose, walking the walk or practicing what I preach in many different ways. And I feel an obligation to do that since we teach this to people. However, the passion object I have, you can't see it if you're watching, but we have a wall over here off to the side with all of the letters and notes and things that people have sent us after they've made their changes. And we've run out of room on it. So we now have a box that's just collecting these things. But I just grabbed one of the letters that was
I love that. I keep like a folder on my desktop called nice things. If someone emails me something like that, that just makes my day. I love that. So if you are listening to the audio, Scott is holding a handwritten letter here though. So yeah, go for it, Scott.
I'll read one or two lines off it here. This is from guy that we helped named Eric Murphy, who was in Vegas and wanted to move to the San Francisco Bay Area. And he said, I wanted to thank you because you've helped me land a job that is more fulfilling in every way than a job than I could have had before I met you. And the work we did and the techniques you taught literally changed my life. So he goes on, but these are the types of things that keep me going. So probably could have grabbed any one of those off the wall over there, but it's definitely my passion object because I get to help people and my team gets to help people that are in these types of situations every single day. And we get the opportunity to be able to help them make pretty large changes and become that exception that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, Scott. Guys, thanks so much for listening. I hope that you'll leave a review and stay in touch. Email me about your career journey, any questions that you have at amanda@findyourpassioncareer.com. All right. Bye, everyone.